In the ancient world, empires didn't just win by blood, they won by endurance. Some conquered with swords and ships. Rome conquered with patience. It crept northward mile by mile, not through glory, but through stone, discipline, and unbreakable order. And when the legions finally reached the misty highlands of what we now call Scotland, it wasn't the edge of a sword that carried them forward. It was the edge of civilization itself. 30,000 Caledonian warriors gathered against just 12,000 Romans. On parchment, the odds were laughable. The tribes of the north outnumbered the legions nearly 3-1. They were hunters, farmers, and hill fighters who knew the land like they knew their own heartbeat. Every ravine, every forest path was a weapon in their hands. Their leader, a fierce figure remembered as Calgacus, commanded not from marble halls, but from the raw soil of his homeland. Across the battlefield stood the governor of Britannia, Gnaeus Julius Agricola, a man who had spent years pushing the empire's reach further into the wild. His legions were weary, far from their supply lines, staring into a horizon the Romans called the edge of the world. By all logic, they should have been swallowed by the northern fog. But logic, as history has shown, rarely stands a chance against Rome. Most people today remember the clash of armies, the armor, the swords, the blood. Yet the true secret of Rome's triumph in the north was something quieter, almost invisible. It wasn't born in battle, but built across generations: the roads. Those endless, straight veins of stone carved through mountains and marshes were more than pathways. They were Rome itself, carried on men's backs, pressed into the earth one slab at a time. So, how could a road decide the fate of nations? How could something so still and silent prove deadlier than a legion's blade? The Caledonians, as Rome called them, were not one nation. They were a constellation of tribes scattered across the northern wilderness, farmers, herders, and warriors living between the mountains and the sea. They spoke a Brittonic Celtic tongue that tied them loosely to their southern cousins. Yet politically, they were a storm of independence. Each tribe had its own customs, gods, and rivalries. No single ruler commanded them all. No great capital united their strength. Their warfare reflected that independence. They did not march in iron ranks or follow the rigid rhythm of drums. Their armor was light, their formations fluid. They fought as the land taught them to fight, through surprise, speed, and the ruthless use of terrain. They vanished into forests and reappeared on Roman flanks like shadows. To the disciplined legions, they were an enemy without a face, without a center, without fear. A people of wind and earth, impossible to pin down. But then something changed. According to Tacitus, Agricola's own son-in-law and our single great source for this campaign, the northern tribes experienced a revelation. Rome, they realized, was not just another raiding enemy from the south. Rome was a storm that never passed, an empire that didn't simply fight battles, it erased cultures. For the first time in memory, the tribes looked beyond their rivalries. Messengers rode through the night. Fires burned on distant hills as alliances were forged. Ancient feuds were buried, and warriors who once shed each other's blood now stood shoulder to shoulder. It was not a dream of unity, it was a pact of desperation. Together, they would meet the legions in one last stand before the shadow of Rome swallowed them whole. At the heart of this fragile alliance stood the man Tacitus calls Calgacus. Whether he was a real chieftain or a voice born from Tacitus's imagination, we may never know. To the Romans, he was the sword of the north, a figure who could give the tribes a single face. But to Tacitus, he was something more, a vessel for a message. In his writings, Tacitus gives Calgacus a speech so powerful that it transcends time. In that speech, the chieftain condemns Rome as the robbers of the world, predators who consume everything they touch. They create a desert, he says, and call it peace. It is not merely a call to arms, but an accusation carved in moral fire. Rome, he declares, is not a bringer of civilization. It is a machine of enslavement. Tacitus, ever the orator, weaves this speech with precision. He uses anaphora, repeating phrases to hammer truth into the listener's mind, and he strips away connecting words to make every verb strike like a sword, to plunder, to slaughter, to enslave. There are no pauses, no breath between those blows. It is the rhythm of destruction. Even if the speech was a fabrication, it tells us what Tacitus himself believed, that even in victory, Rome stood condemned by its own ambition. He presents a paradox. The empire may win the war, but in doing so, it loses its soul. Agricola understood the stakes. The Caledonians were not only fighting the legions, they were fighting hunger, time, and the brutal winters of the north. Their entire future depended on the grain they had harvested. Without it, they would freeze or starve long before the next campaign season. Rome knew this, so Agricola changed tactics. Instead of chasing scattered raiders through the glens, he struck directly at what sustained them. He sent his legions deep into enemy territory, guided by their stone roads and iron discipline, and seized the Caledonians' granaries just as they were filled. Picture it, a land painted gold with new harvests, barns stacked high, smoke curling peacefully from thatched roofs. And then, the sound of marching, the red banners of Rome cresting the hills, the gleam of helmets under a gray sky. The enemy has arrived at your doorstep, not to duel your warriors, but to burn your future. In that moment, the tribes faced an impossible choice. They could let the Romans torch their grain and doom their families to hunger, or gather every fighting man left and meet the legions head-on. It was no longer just a battle for land or pride. It was a battle for survival itself, the last breath of freedom in the highlands before Rome's shadow fell across the world. In the farthest reaches of Rome's ambition, where the mountains clawed at the sky and the mist never lifted from the moors, the Caledonians finally gathered for war. Tacitus tells us their ranks swelled to nearly 30,000. Warriors from scattered clans, men who had spent their lives raiding, hunting, and surviving in the unforgiving north, now stood together for the first time. They were fierce, unyielding, and ready to die for their land. Yet by standing shoulder to shoulder in open battle, they were doing precisely what they had always avoided. They knew the Roman legions fought differently. They were machines of order, creatures of precision and endurance. The Caledonians fought with heart, but the legions fought with memory, the collective discipline of centuries. Still, necessity left no choice. Agricola had cut them off from their lifeline, their harvest. The Roman governor understood that to defeat a mountain people, you had to attack what they depended on most, their time. By seizing their granaries and torching their fields, he forced them into the one thing they dreaded, a decisive confrontation on Roman ground, under Roman terms. It was not luck. It was design, the design of a civilization that had turned construction into conquest. The Romans didn't just build roads to travel. They built them to rule. When people imagine Roman roads, they often picture narrow dirt paths meandering through woods. The truth is far more astonishing. These were the Viae Militas, the military arteries of the greatest empire the world had yet seen. By the height of Roman expansion, this network stretched more than 400,000 kilometers, 10 times around the planet's circumference. It stitched together mountains, deserts, and seas into a single living organism. Even on this distant frontier of Britannia, more than 4,000 kilometers of engineer perfection cut through hills and marshes like veins of iron. And though merchants, settlers, and travelers benefited from them, the roads existed for one purpose above all others, the projection of power. Rome built highways not merely to connect cities, but to command them. The construction itself was an act of military genius. Each road began with a trench, the fossa, dug deep into solid earth, lined with stones and gravel to keep it dry. Above that came the agger, a raised embankment that lifted the road above mud and floodwaters. Then came layers of tightly packed rubble, sand, and stone, the statumen, rudis, and nucleus, capped with perfectly fitted paving slabs. The surface curved gently to the sides so rainwater could slide off in silver streams. It was a triumph of geometry, drainage, and endurance, a design so strong that many of these roads still lie beneath the highways we drive today. Watling Street, the ancient artery running from Dover to London and north to Wroxeter, still defines the geography of modern Britain. Ermine Street, linking London to York, follows almost the exact same path today. 2,000 years later, engines now thunder where once legions marched, proof that Rome's vision outlasted even the empire itself. Those roads gave Agricola what no barbarian army could ever match: control over time and distance. His legions could march 25 kilometers in a single day, day after day, without sinking into swamps or climbing endless hills. To the Caledonians, this must have felt supernatural, the way Roman troops seemed to appear from nowhere, strike with precision, and disappear again before any counterattack could form. But it wasn't sorcery, it was logistics. Every night, the legions built castra, marching camps as disciplined and symmetrical as the empire itself. Within hours, they carved out miniature cities behind walls of turf and ditch. Archaeological digs in the northeast of Scotland still reveal the ghostly outlines of these camps, proof that Rome advanced not in chaos, but in geometry. One of the largest, Logi Durno near Benahi, covered more than 57 hectares, the size of a modern stadium complex. That single camp could hold over 27,000 men. Think about that. In the middle of hostile wilderness, far beyond any map Rome had drawn, an entire self-sustaining army city sprang up overnight. Soldiers, smiths, cooks, engineers, a moving civilization wrapped in leather tents and iron discipline. And Agricola didn't stop there. His campaign was supported by the Gask Ridge system, a line of forts, watchtowers, and small fortresses built during the Flavian period, around 70 to 80 AD. These outposts weren't designed to permanently hold the highlands. They were meant to keep the arteries of war flowing, to protect supply lines, secure communications, and watch the roads that carried Rome's will northward. Every tower sent signals. Every garrison guarded a link in the chain. This was how Rome thought, not in battles, but in systems. The empire's true strength was its infrastructure, an invisible skeleton of order stretching across the chaos of conquered lands. And then there was Rome's other advantage, the sea. The Classis Britannica, Rome's naval fleet in Britain, wasn't a grand force of war galleys meant for epic sea battles. It was something more practical and far more dangerous. It was a supply engine. These ships carried soldiers, supplies, and messages along the coasts, turning the English Channel and the northern seas into floating highways. During Agricola's northern campaign, the fleet moved ahead of the army, scouting coasts, landing scouts, spreading fear, and cutting off escape routes. But its most vital role was sustenance. It kept the legions fed. By transporting grain and equipment by sea, Agricola's troops didn't have to haul wagons or forage across enemy terrain. They could move light, strike fast, and stay organized. Historians call this the dual supply system, land and sea working as one. Without it, the campaign would have collapsed under its own weight. Scotland's rough terrain would have swallowed the Roman army whole. But with the fleet feeding the roads, Agricola could keep his men marching like clockwork, a synchronized engine of conquest powered by discipline and design. By the time the legions reached the highlands, the outcome was already being written in the dust. The roads, the forts, the fleet, all of it had funneled the tribes toward a single inevitable confrontation. On one side stood the Caledonians, a confederation of proud, desperate clans led by Calgacus, their legendary chieftain. On the other side, the disciplined might of Rome, Agricola's legions, auxiliaries, and cavalry. The Caledonians may have had more men. Estimates range as high as 30,000 warriors, but they lacked Rome's machinery. Their swords were long and unwieldy, their shields small and thin. Their chariots, once the terror of ancient Britain, now served more as symbols of honor than weapons of war. They gathered on the ridges, painted in woad and shouting defiance, their war horns echoing across the glens. Agricola's army was smaller but surgical. 11,000 auxiliaries formed the front line, tough, battle-tested men from across the empire. Batavians, Tungrians, Gauls, Spaniards. These weren't raw recruits. They were professional killers shaped by endless campaigns. On the flanks, squadrons of cavalry waited for the signal to envelop the enemy. Behind them, the legions, Rome's core, stood unshaken near the safety of the camp, held in reserve. Agricola wanted to win without even deploying them. It was a statement of control and of confidence. To this day, scholars still argue about where the battle took place, at Benahi, Dunsinane, or Maigret Hill. But no matter the site, the story remains the same. On that cold northern plain, the fury of the tribes met the machinery of empire. The wild collided with the engineered, and the outcome would echo through the centuries, the moment when the edge of Rome met the edge of the world. On the farthest rim of the Roman world, where the empire's marble roads dissolved into moors and mist, the legions of Rome met their final northern challenge. It was here, among the heathered slopes and iron-gray skies of Caledonia, that history recorded one of antiquity's most fascinating paradoxes, a flawless Roman victory that achieved nothing permanent. For every Roman campaign, there was an invisible rule: the army must always remain within reach of its lifeline. A legion never fought far from its castra, its fortified marching camp. And in the shadow of the Grampian Mountains, one such camp stood vast and silent, Logi Durno. It was the northernmost monument of Rome's ambition, an engineered city of war, a breathing organism of supply chains, blacksmiths, engineers, medics, and soldiers. Only from such a stronghold could Agricola dare to summon the full might of the empire into this land of storm and stone. From those defenses, his forces advanced northward, crossing the threshold of the known world. Before them, on the rising slopes of a hill Tacitus calls Mons Graupius, stood the massed ranks of the Caledonian Confederation. They took the high ground, a natural fortress, arranging themselves in layered terraces that climbed up the hillside like steps of a living amphitheater. Their chariots, relics of an older age, lined the flat ground below, wheels flashing in the pale northern light, their horses restless and stamping. Above, the Caledonian warriors shouted war cries that rolled down the slopes like thunder. Painted in woad and scarred by generations of struggle, they believed the gods of the hills watched from the clouds. To them, this was not just a battle, but a holy stand, the defense of everything untamed and unyielding in the world. Below them, the Romans formed up with machine-like precision. Agricola's auxiliaries took the front line. The cavalry held both wings, and the legion stood in reserve near the safety of camp. The contrast was striking. On one side, wild energy and instinct. On the other, order forged by centuries of conquest. Agricola's plan was simple and devastatingly effective. Force the enemy to fight downhill, draw them into close combat where their long swords became liabilities, and let the discipline of Rome do the rest. As the morning mist thinned, the two sides faced each other across the glen. Then came the opening act, a storm of missiles. From the hillside, Caledonian javelins and stones rained down, answered by Roman pila hurled in tight volleys. Chariots darted across the lower ground, their riders shouting defiance as they hurled spears at the Roman front ranks. The plain echoed with the sound of iron on shields and the screams of wounded horses. Yet the Roman line did not break. Shield by shield, the auxiliaries locked together, absorbing the chaos with unshakable composure. To the Caledonians, this must have seemed inhuman, an enemy that did not flinch. When the chariots wheeled away, leaving broken bodies in their wake, the battlefield fell silent for a moment, that terrible silence before a storm truly begins. Agricola seized it. He gave the order, and the Batavian and Tungrian auxiliaries advanced. These men were hardened killers from the Rhine frontier, masters of close-quarters combat. They charged uphill in tight formation, short gladii, stabbing in rhythm, shields pressing forward like the slow grind of an iron tide. The Caledonians met them with fury, their long blades sweeping wide, but there was no space to swing. The Roman line closed the distance deliberately, suffocating the momentum of their foes. What had begun as a roar of freedom became a struggle for breath. Step by step, the Caledonian front buckled under the relentless press of shields and steel. When a moment came, Agricola unleashed his cavalry. From both flanks, Roman horsemen thundered across the plain, spears leveled, crashing into the enemy's exposed sides. The sound was apocalyptic, the shriek of horses, the shatter of armor, the cries of men being cut down. Within moments, the Caledonian line fractured. What had been a wall of defiance became a river of retreat, flowing back into the forested hills. Tacitus, ever loyal to his father-in-law, records that 10,000 Caledonians died, while only 360 Romans fell. Even allowing for exaggeration, the scale of the defeat was catastrophic. The battlefield was strewn with the dead, warriors who had never before stood united, now lying together under the same northern sky. As the survivors fled, they burned their own villages and granaries, denying the Romans the satisfaction of conquest. By dawn, the legions found only empty fields and smoldering ruins. Agricola had won the hill, but the land itself remained unconquered. Yet the general was not content with a silent victory. He sought spectacle, a gesture that would turn his campaign into legend. He ordered the Classis Britannica, the Roman fleet, to sail around the entire coast of Britain. It was the final act of imperial theater, the circumnavigation of an island now claimed, symbolically at least, in the name of Rome. The ships cut through the northern seas, reaching as far as the Orkney Islands. To the empire, this voyage meant one thing. Rome had encircled the last wilderness. Britannia, they declared, was theirs. But beneath the banners and speeches lay a quieter truth, that domination on a map does not equal control on the ground. Agricola was soon recalled to Rome by Emperor Domitian, his triumph shadowed by politics and envy. The legions he left behind could not hold what he had taken. The Gask Ridge forts fell silent. The roads north of the Forth decayed. The tribes, shattered but not destroyed, crept back from the woods and reclaimed the hills their ancestors had died defending. The empire had spent a fortune in men and stone to conquer a land that yielded no gold, no grain, and no peace. Caledonia was simply too far, too harsh, and too poor to justify the cost. The strategic logic of empire prevailed: withdraw, consolidate, defend. In time, the grand experiment of expansion gave way to the stoic pragmatism of walls. Hadrian's Wall rose in 122 AD, a ribbon of stone marking the empire's true northern edge. 2 decades later came the Antonine Wall, a second line, briefly pushed further north before being abandoned again. It was the visible acknowledgement that Rome had reached the limit of its reach, a physical confession carved in stone. Tacitus, ever the moral historian, summarized it with haunting brevity. Predomita Britannia et statim missa. Britain was completely conquered and immediately abandoned. His words still echo as one of history's most poetic indictments of imperial overreach. Even later emperors would try. Men like Septimius Severus, who marched north with 40,000 troops 2 centuries later, determined to succeed where Agricola had failed. But the land itself fought back. Disease, ambushes, and the endless rains broke his army's spirit. Rome could conquer men, but not mountains, nor weather, nor time. Mons Graupius remains one of the most profound examples of Rome's brilliance and its blindness, a battle where engineering triumphed but endurance failed. Roads, fleets, and forts gave the Romans every tactical advantage, yet in the end, the victory proved hollow. The infrastructure remained for a generation. The empire did not. The Caledonians have been broken, yes, but not erased. They endured as ghosts in the glens, as whispers in the stone, as the first voices of the people who would later be called the Picts. For historians, Mons Graupius is more than a battle. It is a parable about power, about how even the greatest machine of civilization can find its gears grinding against the raw immensity of the natural world. Rome had mastered the art of conquest, but not the art of permanence. And perhaps that is the true legacy of Mons Graupius. It was a victory that drew the map of Rome's limits, the moment the empire realized that even its roads, its fleets, and its unshakable discipline could not extend civilization beyond the patience of the land itself.